Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Grand. I'm the CEO here at MedTech Innovator. For those of you who haven't been here before, MedTech Innovator is an accelerator. We focus on finding the most compelling startups all over the world, the ones that are developing the technologies that are going to keep us all healthy, living longer lives. And I want to make sure that these companies are successful. So here at MedTech Innovator, what we do with our team is we partner up these startups, the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are the leading companies developing these solutions, with leaders in the healthcare industry. So those are some of the large corporations, some of the federal agencies, regulatory bodies, and so on. Our job is to make sure people have the best advice possible, no matter where they're located, whether they're in Australia, whether they're in China, anywhere in between in the Asia Pacific. We want to make sure that the companies in the MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific program are getting the best advice possible. So as part of all of this, what we do at MedTech Innovators, we run a MedTech Innovator webinar series. So this is our Asia Pacific live series at medtechinnovator.org/APAC. And this program is designed to make sure that we provide the opportunity for the companies in our cohorts to have a chance to network with and to learn from some of the experts in different fields. Tonight's webinar is going to be on regulatory, both US and Asia Pacific. This is an incredibly important topic because not all, but most of the companies that we interact with are regulated by somebody. And many of the companies that are unregulated, that are developing a device that's going to be used directly by perhaps just consumers themselves, or maybe that's a software system. Many times these companies wind up pivoting and becoming regulated. So it's very important to understand how the regulatory process works, what to think about, and the differences between US and Asia Pacific. So again, we run one program for companies that want to enter the US market. That's what we call MedTech Innovators flagship program. And then we also offer MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific. And you're here tonight in MedTech Innovators Asia Pacific webinar series. So that's a little bit of the background. The way this always works is that we have companies that are here from our cohort who are here listening during this first hour. And then in the last 30 minutes, there's a Q&A session where they get to ask questions. For the YouTube live audience, that's if you're watching this on YouTube, you can still ask questions by entering something in a little box over here. You can enter a question. One of our team members will relay that to our moderator, who will then ask the panelists if you get it in during the first hour. If not, don't worry about it. You can always put some questions into the comments in the YouTube, and we'll try and get to those, and we can put the notes in after the session. So that's it. Enjoy our session this evening, which is going to be moderated by our managing director in the Asia Pacific, Frederick Nyberg. So with that, I will hand it over to Frederick, who will introduce himself and tonight's expert panelists. Frederick.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul, and very good morning, everyone. And good evening to those of you dialing in from the US. My name is Frederick Nyberg. I'm the Managing Director for MedTech Innovator based here in Singapore. Today's topic is a critically important one. And what we'll try to do today is not just talk about regulatory pathways in general terms. We want to try to contrast some of the pathways and strategies for Asia Pacific with those in the US. Many of you in our cohort and elsewhere are focusing increasingly on the US, especially as EU MDR has made things a little bit more complicated for the EU. And therefore, what we find is a lot of Asian headquartered startups in MedTech, digital health, and IVD are turning to the US before they turn to the EU. We're seeing more and more of that, and we'll get a chance to speak a bit more about that with our panelists. So we have an exceptional panel today, and I'm thrilled to introduce Mary McNamara from Alira Health, who is the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs based out of Boston. And Mary, she'll introduce herself in just a moment. She is based on the East Coast of the US, so thank you so much for staying up late and joining us this evening. Based here in Singapore, we have Jack Wong, who does a number of things. Good morning, Jack. Including being the founder of ARPA, which is the Asia Regulatory Professionals Association, and he'll talk a bit about some of the other things that he's doing as well in just a moment. So we have a number of interesting topics here to cover today. As Paul just mentioned, we're live streaming for the first hour, and then we'll have our cohort ask questions for the last 30 minutes. So maybe to begin with, I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Tell us a bit about your background, your company, and the role that you play at that company. And I'll turn to Mary first.
Sure, thank you. And good morning, everybody. Yes, so my name is Mary McNamara. I am a Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Alira Health. I have been in regulatory for medical devices, IVDs, digital health for almost 30 years now, focusing in healthcare and life sciences. I've been involved with probably over 200 different types of submissions for novel medical technologies, 510Ks, PMAs, IDEs, de novos, 513G requests for classifications. So just about every type of submission, every therapeutic area. I've worked at large medical device companies. I was at another consulting firm for 17 years, and I was at 3 startups. So I have been on both sides of the table, so I understand the challenges that startup and small companies face, as I have worked at those as well. So I hope you find this evening helpful. And if you would like to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. I'll talk a little bit about Alira Health. It will take just a few seconds. Alira Health is an international consulting firm focusing again in healthcare and life sciences. We have a number of practice areas that are integrated services to help healthcare and life science organizations innovate and grow and get their products to market. So we offer product development services, regulatory in both medical device and pharmaceutical sides. We have a clinical research arm, health economics, market access, management consulting, transaction advisory, real-world evidence, and advanced analytics. We can provide as much or as little guidance as you need from a regulatory perspective. We can guide you through the entire process, including writing submissions and strategies, or just work with you to edit and review your submissions. So again, we are here to help if you need us, and I look forward to listening more to your questions and giving you more information.
Great, thank you very much, Mary. And Jack, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good morning and good evening. And very honored to share my experience again to MedTech Innovator. My name is Jack. I'm based in Singapore. I have normally a few roles in concurrently. Career-wise, I working in many pharmaceutical medical device company before, like Johnson & Johnson, Baxter, Allergan as the Asia regulatory head. I also work in a notified body before, like BSI. So I hope my wide range of the medical device experience can contribute to the team. At the moment, I'm working in Organon. They also bring in medical device as well. That's my career part. In terms of association, I'm the founder of this Asia Regulatory Professionals Association. So it's more association to raise the professionalism, awareness of the regulatory professionals in Asia. My third role is more academic. I'm teaching in more than 9 universities at the moment in Asia. We have a dedicated regulatory modules there. So if any startup you are interested to be the guest speaker, please let me know. I will start my Nanotechnological University teaching January next year. And actually October, there will be Tohoku University in Japan, etc. So if you're interested to be speaker to share your startup journey with the student, let me know. And also for the academic side, we also have publications. This is one of the book you can find it in the Amazon called Handbook of Medical Device Regulatory. I also always tell Frederick, if he don't sleep well, he can open this book. Once you read it 2 page, understand some regulation, you will sleep very well like that. So there may be some therapeutic value about this book, about regulation maybe. So nice joining us here, and look forward to share with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jack. Appreciate that advice. First question before we maybe dive into the details of some of the regulatory challenges here. When do you think a startup should really start planning its regulatory strategy, and at what point would it make sense for a MedTech startup to consider appointing an expert in the either in-house or external for regulatory advice? And Jack, maybe I'll start with you.
Thank you, Patrick. And as a regulatory professionals, and also work in many different size of company, multinational, medium size, etc. The golden rule is you need to start the involving regulatory, even at the R&D phase, all the way to post-marketing. The major reason is you are going to a business which is very different from other business. You are not selling toys or Coca-Cola. You are selling a medical device. And selling a medical device is a very highly regulated business. They have related regulation in clinical trial, of course, registrations, even after you are launching the product, promotion, post-marketing surveillance, lots of regulation in the whole product life cycle. So I think you don't want to get into trouble suddenly, your competitor sue you, you didn't do something right. So that's one, is a highly regulated business. And the second thing is you don't want to waste your money and time, because you spend all your effort, you design something, and then you realize, my God, there's a national standard in Japan, and also there's a national standard in China. Oh, first time I heard about that. Okay, my product need to redesign again, change the specification again. That's, of course, waste of your money and time to redo many things again and again. So better know it during your R&D phase. Okay, this is how my product design. You will be able to go to China market, Japan market, etc. Then you will have a more successful product launch quicker than your competitor, etc. So that will be my quick comment.
Thanks for that. And Mary, just your quick thoughts on that as well.
Sure. And I would say for the US, it's exactly the same. I agree with Jack. You can never start early enough. Absolutely, during that R&D phase, it's very important to understand the regulatory pathway so that you are developing and testing a device, characterizing your device as part of that process. During R&D, you need to know the classification, the testing, and the pathway, because it will end up streamlining your long-term regulatory submission process. You want to be familiar with what the regulatory authorities are going to be looking for your specific type of device. And again, you want to fold that information into your development program, and then when you're designing your verification and validation testing. So just to reiterate what Jack said, you really cannot start early enough. So we recommend as early as when you have a concept on a piece of paper, to start thinking about your regulatory strategy and pathway.
That's helpful. Thanks for that. And Mary, just staying with you, sort of an inevitable question as we're in the midst of a pandemic here. How has COVID-19 affected regulatory work from your perspective in the US? Are there delays in doing trials because elective surgeries are being postponed? Are approval times delayed, or is there a focus from the regulators to prioritize respiratory care devices and everything else gets delayed? What are you seeing?
Yeah, this is going to take a few minutes. So,
of course.
So from the beginning of COVID right away, not much changed for me in terms of regulatory, meaning all of my projects continued. We were continuing to submit medical device submissions to the FDA. However, we had a lot more business because we had a lot of clients that were making products that were dedicated to COVID. And I was also on a couple of national task forces to get COVID-related medical devices to the market faster through the FDA. So at the very beginning of COVID, I would say from when they declared the public health emergency on February 4th through the summer of 2020, FDA was being very communicative, very responsive for any kinds of products that were related to COVID. So, typically it takes a long time to get in touch with FDA. You have to go through a formal process. You could pick up the phone or you could send an email to, say, the respiratory group or the in vitro diagnostic group, and they would get back to you rather quickly, again, because it was COVID-related products. Many of you may know that they instituted this emergency use authorization process. Of course, that's how the vaccines got approved, but that was also applicable to medical devices. So I did submit several devices through the EUA, the emergency use authorization process, and got a couple of approvals. I think what happened was once the market had a lot of specific types of devices for specific uses, FDA felt like once the market was saturated, they started to delay submissions or reject EUAs for specific type of devices for which they thought there was already enough on the market. So that happened. The submissions that were delayed at FDA were some 510K submissions, some responses, and some pre-submissions. So pre-submissions for products that were not related to COVID were delayed. That is still happening into this year, where we have submitted several pre-subs, and there are delays reviewing them. You can tell FDA you don't want them to just withdraw them. You want them to review them no matter how long it's going to take. So that's what's really happened with COVID. So the EUA process, and then some delays in submissions, and still some delays into submissions, almost a year and a half later.
Got it. Thanks for that. And Jack, in Asia Pacific, I guess similar situation there.
Yeah, I think when the crisis happened, there are always opportunity and risk, of course. I think the bad thing everybody aware is the registration approval unavoidably delayed because the regulator cannot go to office. Recently, in Thailand, all the regulators need to be stay at home. Nobody come to office to sign certificate, for example, like that. So, it will delay unavoidably. So this is the so-called quite bad news to the company. They need to aware, maybe buffer sometime like that. But there are also opportunity. I call it maybe good news is you open many innovative way to do things. I see in Asia. I think, for example, in China, you may have an expert panel meeting that you need to talk to the China expert, and you bring in all the maybe US, Europe, expert to open to have a meeting to discuss your product. But now online is okay. So because of the COVID, then it really, of course, save them time, money, and efficiency, and the work. They will on the meeting discuss and approve your product like that. So online expert panel meeting in the past, no one think about that, but now okay. Online audit, I also see it. Again, your regulator is supposed to travel to your country with audit your manufacturing site. Now they will do it virtually, like this. And you know what I see once? They ask the auditee, the company holding a camera, walking around the manufacturing site, show me this, show me that, I really find it amazing. You can audit a manufacturing site with a camera like this. So, you work again. And of course, the third one, in terms of good news, I want to mention is there are many emergency pathway in terms of registration are created. In the past, regulator very reluctant to create any special pathway. But nowadays they understand, it's a COVID, it's a respirator, it's a mask, it's anything related. They are willing to, review their pathway and make things happen. So, I see a lot of opportunity as well.
Very good, very good. No, that's helpful. Let's maybe dive into some of the regulatory challenges here in a bit more detail. Let's talk a bit about classification. approval process, timelines, that sort of thing. And Jack, I'll stay with you here. Device classification, major Asia Pacific markets versus the US and EU. Just very quickly, what are some of the major differences? If you could just highlight those to our audience, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite topic. Every time we teach in university, this is the first lesson. And because it's the most important question, because every country you go, the first question you need to ask yourself as a startup is, what is my product? Is it a drug, device, cosmetic, or food, or anything? Because if you classify your product properly, then your registration pathway, documentation will be very different, right? You have a drug and medical device, etc. And I really want to tell all the companies today is, you are the one to make that decision. You are not here to ask the government official, tell me, oh, I follow your advice. Not like that. I highly recommend as a startup, you should equip yourself with the regulation knowledge, and then you justify the pathway you want or the classification you want. And the simple logic globally, no matter you go US, Europe, Asia, the logic is like, oh, you have a medical use and your function mechanically, physically, then your medical device. That one every regulator understand. And you shouldn't have a big surprise. Your product, if you talk about medical use, physical, mechanical function, then there's a medical device. Most of regulators understand it. But the interesting thing, I would say, the quick factor is when you go to different countries, there's I call it historical reason. Some country will confuse you, like maybe you go India, condom is a drug. Then you argue, my God, condom is not a drug. It should be a medical device, medical use, but physical mechanical function. But you know, India just classifies for this because in the old time they don't have a medical device regulation. They only have drug regulation, so they stick with it for a long time, and the product is classified as a drug in that country. So as a company, you go to overseas, sometimes you don't confuse the regulator, maybe not educated, they don't understand definition. They actually very well understand, but there's some factor called historical reason. So please understand that. And there's always good reason behind that. And the second very interesting factor, I call it social factor. Let's say color contact lens. Color contact lens, I think to most of colleagues, you may know, they have no medical use, but mechanical physical function, right? No medical use, just give you a color. So you may argue, not a medical device, just a color contact lens only. But to a lot of countries, Korea, Singapore, etc., it is a medical device. Then you start to worry again, my God, do I know medical device regulation? I thought it's a medical use plus physical mechanical function. But to a lot of countries, including Singapore, Korea, etc., they found this product create a lot of eye infection locally. So the government not happy about that. And that's why they pick one regulation, for example, the medical device regulation, to control this product so that you don't have funny color lens available in a normal store and people buy and get eye infection. So they control an item, even though you don't really fit the definition, because of this social reason. So again, I hope today you get more equipped yourself that, wow, you know, life can be very dynamic when you go different country for these two factors. My third tips, the quick one is, like I mentioned, you need to understand the regulation and interpret the regulation and negotiate with regulator. My quick example I always share with the student is the alcohol wipes. You know, the tissue paper with alcohol, right? If you use it to clean your wounds, then that's drug because they have a pharmacological action. You do the disinfection for your skin, pharmacological action with your body, so it's a drug. But you use the alcohol wipes to clean surgical bag, medical use, but no pharmacological action with a human body, that's medical device. Or no, you want to launch your alcohol wipes tomorrow in the supermarket, then your alcohol wipes to clean floor, you know, kitchen floor maybe. Then that's household product. So you can imagine if you understand the regulation well, you can turn a product into anything. drug, device, household product for the exactly the same product like that. So, knowing regulation is fun. Please enjoy the regulation talks more. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And let me turn to Mary now, and let's talk a bit about the US pathways. I think most of the smaller companies that are based here in the region are familiar with the 510K and maybe less so with the PMA and probably even less so with the de novo pathway. Very, very quickly, what are some of the major differences between those different pathways? And what are some of the things that maybe a smaller company should watch out for some of these? I know, for example, that investors in this part of the world sometimes shy away from startup companies that want to go follow the de novo path because it is very expensive. Is that correct? And what are some of your perspectives on this?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'll just go through 510K quickly. So like you said, most people are familiar with the 510K process, which is one where there already is an existing classification and your product fits into that classification in terms of indications for use and technological characteristics. And basically you submit a document to the FDA comparing your device to something that's already gone through the 510K process and has been issued a clearance letter from the FDA. And that's the 510K process. 510K processes typically require compliance with standards and preclinical testing, and sometimes animal testing. A small percentage requires clinical studies. The de novo 510K or the de novo process is slightly more burdensome than the 510K process, but it's also for products that are very similar in terms of risk level to 510K products. De novo is only appropriate for devices that are considered low to moderate risk that do not have a valid predicate device. What that means is when you submit a 510K, as I said, your product will fit into a specific type of classification. So some examples would be just a plain old endoscope, arthroscope, wound care products, some knees and hips, orthopedic orthopedic surgical instrumentation. A lot of in vitro diagnostics are considered class 2 and go through the 510K process. So those fit neatly into a classification. A novel product might be low to moderate risk, but you cannot find a classification for it. That is what's appropriate for the de novo. The de novo process itself and the submission is very similar to the 510K submission. The same types of information are required. Indications for use, device descriptions, specifications, testing that you've done, and that could be bench testing, animal testing, and sometimes clinical testing. The one, I would say, big difference, but it's not too big of a difference, is that a risk-benefit profile must be submitted in a de novo. So basically, you're going to tell FDA that the benefits of your novel technology, which are the subject of the de novo, outweigh any risks associated with it. FDA, if they then agree with you and they agree with you've done enough testing to support this product, they will then create a classification for your product. So basically, they're going to publish a classification for your device, as well as a guidance document for another manufacturer to come along and follow and potentially get a 510K once you've gotten your clearance. So that is the de novo process. Again, low to moderate risk products that are novel technologies that don't have a predicate. The PMA process is pre-market approval, and that is intended for products that are life-supporting, life-sustaining implants, the highest risk level devices that there are in the US or anywhere. And so that comes with, that's a much larger submission that is in the, several $1 million range, because typically extensive preclinical testing, animal testing, and clinical testing are required, typically randomized controlled trials, as well as manufacturing information, quality system information. So it's very significantly different than the 510K and the de novo 510K process. Some examples of class 3 products that go through a PMA are like drug-eluting stents, like heart implants, implants intended for osteoarthritis of the knee, a lot of, life supporting, life sustaining types of monitoring products will be considered class 3 PMAs.
Thanks, Mary. That's very helpful. So I guess understandably, a lot of smaller companies are focused on the 510K pathway. And that sort of raises the question, I guess, how on the one hand, they have to demonstrate substantial equivalence, that they are similar to something that's already on the market, but at the same time, from a marketing point of view, they want to tell the world that they're different, they're better, they're unique. How does a small company balance that paradox?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is true. So it is a difficult balance when a startup wants to differentiate themselves from their competitors. But from a regulatory perspective, we know that the easier pathway would be the 510K pathway, where the whole premise is to be similar to your competitor. So basically, you can't just decide which classification you fall into. Basically, FDA does that for you, right? So if there's a classification in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is an online, federal document, and you fall into that, you need to follow that, right? You can't just decide that you're going to be something else. Now, many novel products sometimes will modify their indications for use to fit into a certain classification to get through FDA in a 510K. And then later on, do a clinical study that will hopefully support maybe a new indication for use or some novel concept with the product, but be still considered a 510K product. And that is one way to stay within the 510K process, but to get some of those marketing claims that will help you, differentiate your technology from your competitors.
That's very helpful. And maybe let's talk about pre-submissions for a minute. And I know some of our cohort startups are familiar with the process. Some may even have gone through it. But I know that there are several who do not know exactly what that is. What is a pre-sub, and why is it something that's important for a startup that's based outside of the US, but wanting to enter the US market? How can they benefit from that?
Okay. Right. So I almost always recommend a pre-submission unless a company has a technology that's identical to something in the market that's been cleared by FDA and there's nothing new involved. So what a pre-submission is a submission to the FDA that's going to introduce the FDA to a novel technology, and it will present FDA with your proposed indications for use, a device description, a proposed regulatory pathway. So whether it's a 510K or a de novo or a PMA, you would provide FDA with some proof of concept testing. I always recommend a small amount of testing just so that FDA has an understanding of, yes, your product does what you say it does, even if it's just a small amount of data. And then we would provide FDA with a test plan. And the test plan should cover all of the testing that we think is needed for your type of a product. We would then ask a series of targeted questions to the FDA, and they would comment on those questions. And examples of those questions would be, does FDA agree that this animal study supports our indication for use? Or does FDA agree that the inclusion-exclusion criteria in our proposed clinical trial synopsis will support, say, a de novo submission? So you ask them targeted questions. They address those questions, but they also will comment on all of the parts of your pre-submission. So a pre-submission to me is an invaluable tool to start to communicate and work with FDA to get an understanding of the testing needed and the regulatory pathway for your device. So again, I always recommend pre-submissions. They are just a great tool with FDA, and there's no fee for FDA to review a pre-submission. And you end up having a great dialogue with the FDA. And again, it should save you time in the long run, because if you skip the pre-submission process and you go right to a 510K or de novo, what will happen is FDA will ask you for testing that you weren't aware of, or you've already done testing, but it's not what FDA would like to see, and you have to repeat it. So it makes the company, you end up spending more money and wasting more time if you didn't do your pre-sub and you went straight for your marketing submission.
Well, those are great points. Thanks very much for that, Mary. And Jack, is there a similar process in Asia Pacific with any other regulators here? Were you able to obtain feedback directly from the regulator before you make a final submission?
Yes, this is actually another very highly recommended step in Asia. And to a lot of company, they will definitely invest money and time to do this one, particularly for Japan. There's dedicated steps, but you need to pay a lot, and also prepare for it to so-called PMDA consultation, for example, in Japan. And also in many other countries, most of the time is free, but only a few is expensive one, for example, the Japan one. So it's highly recommend, but a few tips I want the team to aware. Number one, because you talk to regulator, and in most of the case, the answer may not like very, you are like the official answer is more the interpretation is subject to change like that. So, be careful about your questions. I see company try to prepare this meeting very seriously. It's like the real subject registration. You show them a lot of information and expert. Make sure the regulator actually at that time like your product and convince maybe you don't need to do clinical trial, you only need to do this and do that, so that you win at that time. You're not like totally no idea, hey, tell me what to do, like that. It's okay like that, but compared to the other scenario, you can compare the other one will be more successful because they're already fighting a pathway that is good for them. This one, that depends on luck maybe. So that's how to make use of this pathway. And it's a very common practice in Asia as well.
Good. Thanks for that. And let's just briefly talk about, I'm conscious of time here, we just briefly talk about timelines. What should a startup expect, Mary, in terms of US approval timelines for a typical 510K? How long does it take, for example, to set up a pre-sub meeting with the FDA? Mm-hmm. What do you typically guide companies on?
Sure. So when you submit your pre-submission, you at the same time, the day that you submit it, FDA will get in touch with you to arrange for your meeting. So you submit your pre-submission, say on day 1, and by day 60, you'll have a set of comments back from FDA. But about 3 days after that, you'll have your meeting scheduled. So it's about a 65-day period. 60 days for FDA to review your document. And then another, and then the comments come, and then you have to react quickly to those comments and then get ready to meet with FDA to discuss those comments. So that's about 65 days. The 510K process is a 90-day review time from FDA. However, they always tend to have questions no matter what the device type is. And that typically goes out between, I would say 100 to 120, sometimes even longer. 180 days. De novo 510Ks typically run a little bit longer, and I would say that can be anywhere between 6 months and 1 year. And the PMA process is typically 1 year minimum.
Mm. Got it. Thanks. And Jack, timelines in Asia Pacific, and maybe let's just focus on some markets. I know that China a few years ago used to be among the longest approval timelines in the region, but I think that's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What does it take in China now, typically?
Yeah, every regulator working very hard to improve things, because it's not only for benefit for the company, but also benefit for the country, right? Because there are more innovative product coming to their market like that. So I would say but the thing is, in Asia, there are many countries, so the range is wide. So I would say the work timeline is 6 months to 15 months, depends on country. China, Japan can easily take 12 to 15 months like that. But please understand, Japan, for example, in the future can easily take 1-2 years. Now, 1 year and even shorter possible. So we can see the regulator really working hard to streamline their process, everything. But again, I also want to take this chance to let the startup here to aware. One bonus or interesting thing in Asia is some market is not regulated yet. So the registration is still voluntary. i.e. you can launch your product tomorrow, like that. For example, Hong Kong, Macau, like that. And to a certain extent, Vietnam, because their regulation will be effective next year rather than this year. And most of their device is still considered voluntary. So you can see, maybe you want to make use of this opportunity to really launch your product earlier rather than, waiting for months or years like that. So please notice there's some market like that.
That's good. That's good feedback, Jack. Thanks. Thanks for that. Let's talk a little bit about fast track approvals. Something we hear a lot about now, of course, in the US is breakthrough designation, and it's typically something that startups will issue press releases when they've achieved it, and they get congratulatory messages, and it's a big thing. What exactly is it, and how can a startup know if they're eligible for breakthrough designation, or that particular pathway?
Yeah. Right, so I've been involved with several breakthrough device designation submissions. So what that program is it's a fairly new program. And again, it used to be called the Fast Track program. Fairly new in the last few years that FDA has developed, and there's a guidance document associated with it. And it is a voluntary program for certain medical devices or combination products that have a device component that provide for a more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating conditions or diseases. So there are several criteria that companies would have to meet to gain this breakthrough device designation, and FDA has to agree with this. So the criteria for the breakthrough are that the device provides for a more effective treatment, what I just said a moment ago, but it also has to meet one of the following criteria: that it represents breakthrough technology, and there are no approved or cleared alternatives, or if there is another product like it, yours has to offer significant advantages over what is currently marketed or what is, an existing approved device. And then the last criteria is that the device availability is in the best interest of patients. So it's really, a couple of different criteria that have to be met. And there's also, there's two reasons why getting a breakthrough device designation is important for a company, even in addition to the press releases that you just referred to. One is that once a company receives a breakthrough device designation approval from FDA, then your next step would be to submit a pre-submission. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, typically pre-submissions take at least 60 days for FDA to review them. If you have a breakthrough device approval, then you have an interactive review during that pre-submission process, meaning you submit your pre-submission, and within about a week or so, FDA gets in touch with a company and says, okay, we want to set up a meeting time. And then you have a meeting with the FDA, and then they provide you with comments in about a week. And then you have another meeting with FDA, and then they provide you more comments within about a week or two. So it's a very interactive process. So these are called sprint discussions. That's what FDA calls them. And so that's one benefit of getting the breakthrough device designation. The second is that it allows for reimbursement through CMS in the United States. So there's a program called Medicare Coverage of Innovative Technology, and any breakthrough device designation product that gets an eventual approval, whether that's 510K, de novo, or a PMA, that product will get 4 years of CMS coverage. Now, keep in mind that this situation, the coverage right now is on hold. It hasn't been instituted yet, but it is supposed to happen within a few months. And the other thing to keep in mind is getting a breakthrough device designation with FDA is very helpful. Like I said, you get that interactive review, and then you have that reimbursement coverage. But getting a breakthrough device designation is not a marketing approval, right? It's just a step towards your marketing approval. But if it's appropriate and you have a novel technology that fits this criteria, I highly recommend it.
And Mary, if I understand correctly, a non-US startup can be eligible and apply for this as well.
Absolutely. Any company from anywhere can approve this or any other submission type. Yep.
In fact, you were working with a Singapore company not too long ago on this and managed to successfully get breakthrough designation for them. So
correct, right. Yep.
Very good. So Jack, how can regulatory approvals be fast-tracked here in Asia Pac? There's of course the green channel in China. There's expedited approval with the HSA. Can you tell us a little bit about the environment there?
Thank you. This is always the question the commercial team asks us, can it be quicker? Can it be quicker? Like that. So, right. So there's a few criteria that the government are happy to give you a quicker approval. Like you mentioned, the green channel is a typical one that happened in China. The few things you need to so-called fulfill. Number one, your product must be technology innovative. What you really mean is that it also means impact to the patient, right, in the country, because if the technology is not available, it's innovative, then that's why they're willing to give you this quicker approval technology. Some country, yes, some country, no, is one of the requirements called patent. The green channel in China, they require you to have a patent in China, like that. But of course, as a company or business owner, I think you better do it. You don't want to launch somewhere, but you don't have these kinds of protection. So if you have a patent, then you are one of the criteria you can fulfill the so-called green channel, for example. But it's not a common requirement in every country like that. And then maybe your technology is nothing too superly crazily creative, and but you have a big impact to the patient, and there's unmet needs. You can stop bleeding. In the old technology, it's only 5 hours to stop bleeding. Your technology, nothing very new, but you can stop bleeding in 3 minutes. That is important to the patient, and the regulator are willing to consider, wow, I will do good to my people in my country. I'm happy to give you a quicker approval, even though the technology you use is nothing creative maybe, but the way you use it, how you design it maybe. So that's another important factor. Another one is I call it the reference country, like you just mentioned. That if you got some reference country approval, for example, US, Europe, and most of the common reference country in Asia will be the 5 reference country: US, Europe, Australia, Japan, and Canada. If you have approval in this reference country, you will definitely enjoy an express approval in the Asia, because they see that your efficacy, safety of your product already evaluated by a reputable regulator somewhere. So they won't demand all the raw data to reveal. They're just looking for a summary report maybe. So that's why it's a quicker and faster approval.
And Jack, sorry to interrupt you. So of those 5 reference countries, does a startup need to have approval of all 5? Or is it enough to have approval of 1?
One is good. One is good. Of course, the more the better. But normally, when I look at the Asian market, the first approval they normally get is Europe one, because they work with the regulator, the notified body. May be easier to work with FDA. Maybe the regulator, the notified body in Europe, you get approval normally 5-6 months. Once you got the European approval, you go to Asia countries. That's one of the common pathway. But I'm not saying you must go Europe and then you can come in. You can start from Asia as well. But you don't have this reference country benefit, but give you other benefit like the technology, impact to the patient, etc.
I'm getting the sense that with the new EU MDR complexities, companies are looking to the US now first, before Europe.
This is one of the new so-called challenge. The Europe no longer that quick. So people are switching to US more now. like that. So this is the coming trend.
Right, which is why we have Mary here, of course. So I don't want to put you on the spot here, Jack, but if a startup wants to get regulatory approval in some major Asian markets, which reference country is of greater value, EU or US FDA?
Actually, you know, I learned this in one of the very good book in Singapore, and they talk political things. US approval, from my angle, US approval or Europe approval, both good. But, excuse me, but the political part is different. I think this one, I think the audience in Singapore will understand. Let's say I'm Hong Kong or Malaysia. People will got a gut feeling, you got approval Europe, they will more recognized than US. You know why? Because Hong Kong managed by UK before. Their whole system is a European system. So
bit of colonial history there, perhaps.
That's the thing.
That needs to be taken
when
into
you go
account.
Taiwan, Thailand, they may look at the US system
or Philippines.
Yeah. Even they look at the government, how they call it, they call Taiwan FDA, Thai FDA. You know, even the government name tell you something. But in Hong Kong, we call Department of Health, Ministry of something. So you see, that will have some political advantage. But please don't misunderstand. You come a US approval, go to Hong Kong, they don't hate it. But because they just have a better understanding of the system due to the historical situation like that. So that will be my secondary consideration.
Good feedback, Jack. Thanks for that. Quick reminder to our cohort participants, if you have any questions, and I've seen some of you already do, just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type in those questions. We'll get to them in a moment when we get to the Q&A, or feel free to make any comments in the chat, and we'll try to cover those as well. We have less than 10 minutes left, and I wanted to touch on clinical trial and clinical data and how we use clinical data as well. So Mary, maybe I'll turn to you here first. When should a non-US startup consider conducting trials in the US? Is that dependent on what class device they are or what pathway they're following? And how can they ensure that if they already have some data that's collected from trials outside of the US, that they can actually be used in an FDA submission?
Mm-hmm. Right. So the need for clinical data will be driven by what the classification is. So most class 2 devices do not require clinical data. However, maybe 10 to 15% of de novo submissions do require clinical data. And again, the way to figure that out is to meet with FDA during that pre-submission process. The other way to figure out if clinical data are needed or a clinical study is needed is to search and see if there is a guidance document specific for your type of device, and FDA will outline if clinical data is required. So part of the regulatory strategy and the research to determine if clinical data is needed is just done using the FDA website to see which classification your product falls into. In terms of FDA accepting data from outside the US, part of what a good consultant should do is negotiate with FDA. So we have been involved with several submissions. We have quite a bit of outside the US clients where we have utilized clinical data that have been gathered outside the US and used FDA's guidance document to work with them on that, meaning FDA issued a real world evidence, real world data guidance document about 4 years ago. And basically what that said is, if you have data from outside the US, we need to present that to the FDA as, good, valid scientific evidence to support your technology. And that's what we have done with many of our clients. So FDA is supposed to accept that type of data, even if it's not gathered in the US. Now, it has to be somewhat controlled data. It has to be somewhat formal data. It can't just be, proof of concept testing, but it has to be, a somewhat well-controlled, partially controlled study. And what can happen is if, FDA does accept this data, then it can reduce the size of a potential clinical trial needed in the US. And that's the strategy we typically use. We support another study to reduce the number of patients needed for that study with the other data that's been already collected from outside the US.
Great, that's really useful. Thanks, thanks, Mary. And Jack, for clinical trial requirements in this part of the world, China, for example, there was a time when the NMPA, I think when the days when they were called the CFDA, would not recognize foreign data. I think, again, that has changed recently. Is that correct? Does China now accept foreign data?
Patrick, you are correct. And let me put it this way. I think the regulator in Asia, including China, follow the similar approach that Mary just mentioned. I think all regulators will accept clinical data outside the other country as long as they have a reason to accept it. Like Mary mentioned, the information is applicable to my country people. The study you do is in a scientific way, good clinical practice, etc. Then scientifically they will accept it. But it's a bit of negotiation because regulators also understand every company will say that data is applied to anyone. They are good data, the best product in the world like that. So they need to judge this justification. So it's a negotiation process. And the logic is simple, but you just need to put that. And come back to your question in China, strictly speaking, most of the medical device don't require clinical trial data. They already exempt, and they have a guidance document to talk about what products are exempt already. So if you are in that kind of list, good news. They don't even want to negotiate. You just go ahead. But some may be in the list, then maybe you want to negotiate like that. So that's how it works, for example, in China. And they are going to expand the list of no need to do clinical trial more and more on the way. So, that's why it's important. The company need to work closely with the maybe industry partner, regulator in that country to, work on that list like that. So the good news is it's possible.
Very good, very good. Thanks for that. We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted just to very briefly, and I'll turn to maybe Mary first on this, touch on some new definitions that I think companies are coming across increasingly, especially those working, let's say, with artificial intelligence and developing their own machine learning algorithms and so on. And there are a number of companies that in our cohort that have products with that sort of component in them. So software as a medical device is something that we hear about. What exactly does that mean, and how does the whole application process to the US FDA differ if you have a machine learning algorithm that's an integral part of your solution?
Mm-hmm. Right. So whether it's software as a medical device or it's AI or machine learning, basically they'll typically follow the traditional regulations with the FDA, meaning, again, a pre-submission and then potentially a 510K, depending on the risk level for a product. So a software as a medical device is something that's, software that can be just used on its own. It's standalone without being part of a hardware, right? So, and it can transform like a mobile platform into a regulated medical device. An example of that might be software that might process like a uterine contraction or fetal heart rate for remote monitoring of patients' labor. Or something that could attach to a mobile platform to measure blood glucose levels. So FDA would consider those probably class 2 devices requiring a 510K. So that is software as a medical device. And as far as AI and machine learning, as I said, again, fairly new. I would say FDA has been pretty good about providing feedback and guidance documents on AI and machine learning products. They have published a couple of different discussion papers, basically, proposed regulatory frameworks for these types of products. And they're also using the IMDRF. I forget what that stands for, but that's an international consortium, including FDA, that puts out guidance documents for software-related products. And again, in FDA's regulatory framework for AI products, they're basically saying if your product has AI in it, you can almost count on doing a pre-submission just to figure out what the pathway might be. One last thing I'll mention from a lesser risk point of view. So there's a lot of software apps that are really just related to health and wellness, diet, nutrition, exercise. If they're not telling a patient to do some kind of a medical treatment or anything like that, it's really general wellness. Those fall under something called enforcement discretion. And what that means is no submission is required, but FDA is reserving the right to look for one later on. Okay. But that's like the lowest risk type of like a software app you might find on your phone to track nutrition, exercise, maybe symptoms of a disease, but no treatment related information can be provided to the user.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Mary. And we are at the top of the hour here, so we will need to wrap up. I wanted to, before I extend my thanks here to the panelists, maybe one last question to each of you. If there are any final pieces of advice or any tips that we've missed that you'd like to share with our audience, what would that be? And if there are any free online resources that you're aware of. And I also wanted to ask if the startups in our cohort want to reach you directly, what's the best way to do that? Maybe I can ask you to share your email address in the chat, so if you're open to do that, so they can reach you directly. But first, tips and advice. And Jack, I'll turn to you.
Okay, I think my one simple statement will be, regulation is subject to interpretation. So, it's something for you to interpret rather than just, misunderstand or just follow blindly. So, like Mary and me mentioned, there are many opportunities for you to discuss or negotiate with the regulator to justify your pathway, your classification, your clinical data, etc. So work with a good partner. Find an RA expert in your team, or get an RA expert externally to help this is important, because again, it's a highly regulated business. It's a big differentiation to the success by having a good regulation advice.
Very good, very good. And if any of our startups want to contact you directly, Jack, would you be able to share your email?
Sure, please. You will provide them my email address and my association website as well, right?
Will do. Thanks for that, Jack.
Happy to do that.
Mary, any final tips, pieces of advice, anything that we haven't covered?
Final tips would be actually going back to the beginning, that start as early as you can, hire a good regulatory consultant or hire somebody from within your company to become familiar with the classification, your pathway, guidance documents, and so on. Again, very important to do this because it will cost you twice as much later on if you haven't done your homework ahead of time. All of this information can be negotiated with the FDA, and it will streamline your process down the road. As far as online resources, the FDA website is very easy to maneuver and manipulate and get around. So there's a wealth of information on the FDA website. And honestly, just Google your type of device, Google breakthrough devices, Google, guidance documents, and you'll find that information there. And I also did put my email on the chat, so I am happy to speak with anybody or email any responses to questions that you might have at any time.
Terrific. Thank you so much to both of you. I think it's been a great discussion. Don't leave us yet. We still have 30 minutes of Q&A, but at this point, I wanted to extend my thanks to our YouTube audience. We will end our live stream here. We'll continue with the Q&A